Hi friends and readers, welcome to, what are we titling this video? A mid-year check-in, a recap, what I've read so far this year, and we're gonna walk through some Fable stats, some top 5 favorites, all of the things. I absolutely cannot believe we are heading into July. I think when I post this video, it will be July. Today is June 28th. We are halfway through the year, so let's check in on each other and see what has been happening for the last 6 months. I use Fable throughout the year to track things. So we're gonna go through Fable. It sets it up so nice and neat with some fun categories. My reading goal for the year is 50 books, and I want to tell you why I set my reading goal to be 50 books. Last year was probably the first year that I consistently read all throughout the year. Aside from, I believe, August in 2024, I at least read a book or a few books each month. And August, I think I was traveling, so that's the only reason I didn't read any. I didn't know what would be a realistic goal for myself last year because I work from home and I had been a reader, I'd say, growing up, but I sort of fell out of it when I went to college. And then a few years ago, I think my second year in college, I started to discover reading again. And then last year particularly, I was pretty consistent, but I worked full time, and even this year I work full time, so Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And so I wanted to be able to set a goal for myself that would be fun and allow me to read as a hobby and a break in a mundane 8 to 5 job or a work week and really keep things fresh. I love being able to join a world and hear perspectives and point of views that look totally different than my own, which is why I really like reading. But I didn't also want to overwhelm myself with a goal that just wouldn't fit working full time. So last year, every time I would set a goal of, I think maybe to 20, thinking I'll read 20 books this year, which is totally different than any other year. And then I would get to 20 books and I was probably a few months into the year and reset the goal, add 5 more books, and I would hit the 5 books. I think I made it 30 books, and then I was not through the year yet. So I kept setting my goal higher and higher and then reaching that goal just because I had never read so much throughout a year until last year. And I believe I ended up towards the end of the year setting my goal to 45. I got to the point where the holidays were rolling around and I thought 45 is a great goal. I ended up hitting the 45 mark, I think, on the last day of the year. I tackled the Throne of Glass series towards the end of the year and mixed in a few books in between, and I finished that series towards the end of the year and the first of this year, and I'm at 45. Now we are halfway through 2025. For 2025, I only went up 5 books. I thought that that would be enough to maybe read a few more books than I did last year, but also keeping in mind that I still work full time and I don't want to burn myself out. And for me, the reading goal is just for fun. I like being able to achieve the goal, but it's nothing serious. So if I don't make my goal, then, you know, that's it. Any amount of books in a year is a perfect amount for you and you only. But it is cool to see what everyone's up to each year and see how it looks different person to person. For this portion of the video, we are going to be working in the app called Fable. Fable is what I use to track all of what I've read and rated and then what I want to read. I think Fable is such a aesthetic reading app and it is so fun. It gives you these stats each year, gives you some monthly, weekly, and I think it's a really fun app to interact with and just fun to look at because there are some other platforms that just aren't as cute and sometimes you just want reading to be fun. So in my Fable app, I set my reading goal for the year to be 50 books. And so far, I have read 30 out of 50 books, which is such a good accomplishment for myself. I've had such a good time reading this year. And here is a summary of what Fable thinks I am as a reader based off of its algorithm. It says, I'm a romance reader. You've been reading about magical battles and riveting romances. Don't ever change. Your reading life seamlessly combines both passion and magic. And I'd say this is a fair description. We'll get into the genre genres of book that I've read this year, and by far romance has been the largest genre, and so definitely a romance reader. I really enjoy a light fluffy read. It is so much easier for me to get through in a work week than sometimes diving into a fantasy world, which I do really enjoy. And I am a very time of the year reader, so during the summer I love to read romances. During the fall I'm getting into a fantasy mood. The next stat in Fable is your monthly roundup, so how many books you read each month. In January I only read 3 books. I believe I finished up Throne of Glass in January, and then I started a large fantasy series, which we'll talk about later on, and so those books were much longer than all the other books for the rest of the year. For February I read 5 books. For March I read 4 books. For April I read 6 books, so started to pick up during the springtime. May I also read 6 books, and for June I finished out with 6 books. You can tell that the spring and the summer are where things pick up for me, just because I like the weather picking up. It's more motivating. Lots of new releases in the springtime from some of my favorite authors like Ali Hazelwood, Emily Henry, Abby Jimenez, Lauren Roberts came out with a book. Next is, when am I expected to finish my reading goal for the year? I am on pace. Fable says that I will finish my reading goal in October, which is well past when I finished my reading goal last year, and it also changed so much. This year my reading goal has not changed at all, and if I finish in October, that's also amazing, and I will continue to read how my heart feels following October. If I don't finish in October, which could be the case, I have not really had a reading slump this year, and so I'm wondering if that's gonna encroach. I don't want to wish that for myself, but life happens. The next Fable category is the genres you've read, and I think this is very indicative of the kind of reader that I am. Now I will say some of these stats have been interesting for me because I did try to break into some genres that I haven't historically, and then also there is a genre that I just haven't read much of just yet, but I anticipate that the second half of the year this genre is going to go up in numbers as well. So we're gonna start from least read genre to the most read genre, and Fable puts this genre as, I don't know if you would break this up. For me, a lot of these books in the sports category are probably romance books, but Fable breaks it up into sports. And so I read 3 sports books. I started out reading Mile High, and then I read the second book in the Mile High series. Well, it's called a different name for the series, but the first book is Mile High. I started reading that recently when I had my Kindle Unlimited free subscription for a few weeks. I tried to read some of those Kindle Unlimited books, and a lot of Kindle Unlimited are hockey romances. The other sports books that I read were hockey romances. It was The Wingman. All right, the next category or genre that I read 4 books in is fiction. Fiction is something that I want to explore more in the second half of the year or even next year. I have found myself getting a little bit slumpy when I read a fiction book, so I try to break 1 or 2 here and there so that way I don't put myself in a slump. Now this is the next genre that I think will go up a lot in the second half of the year. We'll have to see towards December, but that category or genre is fantasy. I have read a total of 10 books in fantasy. Now that's still a lot of books, I would say, but I do think that this is going to double in the fall time because I love a good cozy fantasy or cozying up with a fantasy book. I also really haven't bridged the gap of fantasy all that much. There are so many worlds and so many series that I want to get to that I haven't. I will be honest, having last year been my reintroduction back into reading, I read a lot of mainstream fantasy series, and now I got a good taste that I do enjoy fantasy, so I want to try to break into worlds that I don't always see on booktube or book talk and try to expand what point of views I get to read. But excited to see where that leads me in the next few years. So at the end of last year I did read the Throne of Glass series. by Sarah J. Maas, and I finished up with Kingdom of Ash in January of 2025. So that was a large hunkin' book that I started and finished in January. And then another fantasy book that I read was a newer release back in April, I believe. It was Fearless by Lauren Roberts. Fearless was the final book of the trilogy for the Powerless series, and Powerless was also one of those books that really got me back into reading. I ate that book up. We know how a lot of people feel about the second book, Reckless, and then the final book, Fearless. I overall really enjoyed the series, and for the big shocker this year was the category of young adult. I read 12 young adult books, which I can't believe, and I will say, even though it's ranked above the fantasy genre, I don't think that that is indicative of me liking young adult over the rest of these genres. I did read a bunch of young adult in the beginning of this year, but I will say the ratings for these young adult books are not very high. I would say usually in the 2 to 3.5 star rating, but I did read 12 of them somehow. A lot of young adult I also had to listen to on audiobook to help me get through the book. I think I'm just aging out of that writing style and the characters and the plot style of young adult books. I can appreciate them for what they are, and maybe there are some out there that I haven't discovered that I would still really enjoy, but so far that has not been my experience. I did quite enjoy Divine Rivals. My cat's crying. I did enjoy Divine Rivals. Ruthless Vows I did not so much enjoy. As Divine Rivals finished up, I thought, boy, I don't know where we're gonna go with this. And last but not least, the big kahuna genre that I read a total of 20 books. If you can't guess, romance. I am a sucker for a romance book. Every time I meet someone at work or in my social life and they ask, you know, what do you like to read? I say, a romance. I am a romance reader. I'll just throw out some random romances that I've read this year that I won't be mentioning in the rest of the video, but really enjoyed. I think you should read Ready or Not. Now this book is by Cara Bastone, and I know that this is a trope that some people are not going to enjoy, and I thought myself that I wouldn't enjoy it either, but I actually really enjoyed this book. I believe I gave it a 4-star if I'm not mistaken, or maybe a 4.25. The two characters in this book are so lovable. The male main character is very golden retriever, the female main character very type A. You just can't help but appreciate their story and their romance. I also bought this book in Brooklyn, and it is based in Brooklyn, so it was a little special book buy for me. I think it's also a signed copy, autographed by the author, and I bought it at the Rip Bodice. It was my first trip to the Rip Bodice in Brooklyn, and it was the cutest little bookstore ever. I hope that I get to go back there one day. I think about that trip to New York and to Brooklyn and just associate it with this book, but even if I didn't, it's a good book. You should pick it up. Another romance book that I read was Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. I wanted to mention that because Ali Hazelwood is one of my favorite romance authors. Now she is kicking out books so many times in the year, it's hard to keep up. I cannot believe how many books she's kicking out. I will say some of the more recent books have not been my 5-star reads, but I always enjoy reading it. She's very fast paced and has such a fun writing style and a take on books, so I'm excited to see what's coming out in the second half of the year. I think that the second book in the series of Bride comes out. Did you guys like Bride? Please comment down below how you felt about Bride if you read it by Ali Hazelwood. I also read Nothing Like the Movies, which is a sequel to Better Than the Movies. I know that people did not enjoy Nothing Like the Movies like they did Better Than the Movies, but I had a really good time reading it. I remember where I was when I read Better Than the Movies, on a cruise. I graduated from college, and so being able to come back to Nothing Like the Movies a few months or a few years later was special to me. And finally, another book that I read in the romance genre, which was probably within the last 2 weeks, was The Love Haters by Catherine Center. I like to throw out Catherine Center, and even though The Love Haters was a low rating for me, I still have read a good bit of books from Catherine Center, and so an honorable mention for the romance category. Now we get into the next statistic for Fable, which is most read authors. Some of my all-time favorite authors are not in this category. My favorite author ever is Emily Henry. No surprise, no shocker there. She usually only comes out with one book a year. I did read it. It is on my Emily Henry shrine back here. Great Big Beautiful Life. I did only rate it a 3-star. I wouldn't say a disappointment. I never get my expectations too high. She is who I read getting into reading. Beach Read in particular. I have many a Beach Read copies here. So Emily Henry does not make it on my top read author, but that's just because she only puts out one book a year. Which, fair enough, because I couldn't write one single book a year, probably couldn't write one single book my whole life. And so I totally understand. So who are the authors that are on my most read authors? The first one up is going to be Jenny Han. I did read the Summer I Turned Pretty series. I will say I actually watched the first season and the second season on Amazon Prime before I had ever picked up one of these books. And I actually was going to finish out the TV series when the third season came out before I picked up the books, because I didn't want to know how the series was going to end before I watched it, because I had never read the books. I don't normally do that. I know a lot of people say that the books are better than the TV shows or the movies, but for me it just happened that I started the series before I realized it was books, and I started the series watching it in college with my friends. So I wanted to try to finish the series not knowing anything that would happen. Unfortunately, that was not the case. I listened to a reader podcast and they didn't give a spoiler warning when they were actually talking about the TV series on their podcast. I got spoiled what happened in the third book, and thus they were predicting that would happen in the third season of The Summer I Turned Pretty, which is not out yet, but I'm super excited. It comes out in about 2 weeks from when I'm filming this video. I cannot wait. To wrap up why I was even talking about that, I read all 3 of those, which is why Jenny Han is one of my top read authors. The Summer I Turned Pretty is a great series. It was written a few years ago and now it's just becoming a resurface because of the series being out and for the last few years, or the TV series. I'll reiterate what I reiterated before. Young adult is just not what I'm looking for in a romance book. Alright, tied for 3 books this year is also Rebecca Yarros. I managed to go years without reading Fourth Wing, and then I had a bestie gal who was reading those books at the end of last year, I believe, and she told me that Onyx Storm was coming out, the 3rd book in that series, in January, and she wanted me to in advance for the 3rd book coming out. So I finally fell into that and read Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, and Onyx Storm all in January and February. I read Fourth Wing and Iron Flame in January and I just barely didn't get it in before that 3rd book came out, but I ended up reading the 3rd book, Onyx Storm, in February, so I fell victim to the Fourth Wing fandom. And I will say I was all over TikTok and the Zayden TikToks. I'm a fan. I'm just a fan. Besides Throne of Glass, I think that Fourth Wing was my introduction to dragons in books, and I love them. I absolutely love them. And then the final author of the most read books this year so far for me has been Stephanie Garber. Now, I didn't really know who Stephanie Garber was, and the reason why she is 3 books for me is because I read the Once Upon a Broken Heart book, and then the other 2 books that are in that series as well. This is young adult, and so many booktubers had recommended this series. It was very quick and very easy to get through because it's young adult and it's simple writing in a fairy tale experience, but I don't think that I hated those books. I think the 3rd book I ended up giving a 4-star just because it was a pretty bow on top of the series. I will say that I don't know much other about Stephanie Garber. Finally, we are going to discuss my top 5 rated books for the first half this year. We're going to start out with The Wedding People by Alison Espach. I really don't know how to say that and I should look it up, but I didn't. The Wedding People was a 5-star rating for me. This book is a book that you should check the trigger warnings for. It is a literary fiction, which was out of my comfort zone for the year, but I'm so glad that I picked this up. This is also a very cute cover in my opinion, despite being a book that has some hard topics and some topics that aren't always easy to read about. It follows Phoebe. Phoebe checks into a hotel in Rhode Island. Phoebe does go there to take her own life and runs into the bride. The bride thought she had booked out the entire hotel, so there should be no one at the hotel other than the wedding people, hence the title of the book. However, Phoebe was able to slip in and book a reservation that day, and it changed the trajectory of that day and the rest of her life. The next 5-star book in my top 5 ratings, because it was a 5-star, was a book I read last week actually. May even be a 6-star category for me. The X-Files by Jessica Joyce. You can watch my video from last week just to see how much I enjoyed this book. It is a romance book. To set a spoiler of the trope, it is a second chance romance that follows Georgia and Eli. Georgia and Eli are exes whose best friend is someone they share, so their best friend is shared between them, of course, and they have not talked in 5 years, but their best friend is getting married, so there is going to be forced proximity for the both of them to help this wedding happen. And the storyline of following them rekindling for the first time in 5 years is just, I recommend. Number 3 in my top 5 books so far this year was also a book I read last week in the same video as The X-Files. That's One Golden Summer by Carly Fortune. This was a 4.5-star rating for me. I had never read a Carly Fortune book, but I know that her books are very summery, usually in a summer setting like the lake. Now this book follows Alice, who is a photographer. She went to the lake with her grandparent years and years ago as a teenager and caught a picture of a yellow speedboat with some other teenagers in it. And now it's fast forward, she's 33 or 34. She's back at the lake discovering her passion of photography again, and she meets someone who's taking care of the lake house, Charlie. So we follow Charlie and Alice as they have a summertime together. The 4th book in my top 5 so far is The Conditions of Will by Jessa Hastings. I read this on my Kindle under Kindle Unlimited. I picked this book up and rated it a 4.5 stars, just like One Golden Summer. All of the booktubers who I watch, Sarah Caroli, Destiny Sidwell, Rachel Catherine, had mentioned this book and just thoroughly enjoying it, so I had to pick it up. I will say Jessa Hastings, the only other book I've read by her was Magnolia Parks, and I didn't enjoy that very much at all. I think I gave it a lower rating, but I wanted to give this book a second chance for me reading Jessa Hastings books, and clearly I enjoyed a 4.5 stars. This was a romance, and female main character was a psychology major, and I also majored in psychology in college. A story about another Georgia. This time Georgia is living in London, and there are reasons why she lives in London, and we get to explore her family dynamic. It's a very real family with real issues type. They are from the South, which I am also from the South, and so Georgia has to go back home for a specific reason, and we follow her time back home. The male main character's name is Sam, and Sam is there as a guest when everyone goes back home and the family's meeting back up, and we see how Georgia and Sam get to know each other. The reason why I love Georgia and the idea that she is a psychology major is because it has so much to do with her personality, and she analyzes people, and people either enjoy that she can analyze them or they really hate it. And I think it's such a fun concept. Loved the story. Also, the cover. I just love this cover. And the last top 5 book was a book that I rated 4 stars, The One Dark Window book by Rachel Gillig. I rated this 4 stars. I believe this is a dark fantasy or a gothic fantasy genre. This book follows Elspeth, who has a cursed secret that she keeps to herself for the most part. It is a very mysterious, magical, it's based in a kingdom. There's gothic forest. I really enjoyed this book for the slow burns. If you like slow burn, I would pick this up. There is a second book, I believe it's a duology. It could be a trilogy, I'm not quite sure. Those were my top 5 rated books for the year. That brings us to the end of this mid-year check-in. I am really going to try to focus on reading from the library in the second half, really utilizing Libby. I actually read Libby a lot, which is why I don't have a lot of physical copies that I hold or have on my bookshelves. I also don't have much space in my house for any more books than these 2 bookshelves behind me, and so I'm gonna keep reading on Libby, read some library books if they have them, and then just buy some books and enjoy reading. If you are reading more or less and working full-time, I'd love to hear what your reading goal is. So drop your reading goals below and how you track your books. I know some people use Goodreads, some people use Fable, some people like to use Notion. What are some other apps out there that you recommend, and tell me a little bit why you recommend them? I would like to explore them. I can't wait to see what the next half of the year hold. Thank you for hanging out with me today, and bye for now.